Meep.
After endless hype and recommendations, I finally watched Talk to Me, and I've got to be upfront and say that I haven't been this internally conflicted on a horror film since Midsummer. Ironically, given its title, Talk to Me is really difficult for me to talk about. And why is that? Well, the film is directed by Michael and Danny Philippou, the guys behind the popular YouTube channel RackaRacka. Now, YouTube and the film industry have never had the best relationship. Bar a few notable examples, movies by YouTubers have typically been of questionable quality at best, and Hollywood has long been a space that YouTubers have been strategically gatekept from.
When people look at your past work, they look at our stuff and they're like, oh, you guys have done some stuff on YouTube? What? YouTube, the thing where that guy recorded a video of a dead dude? Oh, YouTube, the thing my kid watches? Anything you've done in this context, nobody cares.
For somebody wanting to go out and make a film, how would you suggest they go about doing it?
I can't say do YouTube because my producers didn't know that I had a YouTube channel until I was in Iceland.
Really?
Making the film, yeah.
Wait, how much did the YouTube thing help at, if at all, outside of
Zero.
like just your experience of it?
Didn't help at all. I mean, it's helping a lot with marketing the film, for sure. But zero with getting the actual film.
But now, for what feels like the first time, a couple YouTubers managed to make a good film that is also being widely embraced, complete with cosigns from industry names like Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, Sam Raimi, Hideo Kojima, and even Steven Spielberg, for God's sake, which is exactly why talking about this film is such a difficult proposition for me. Though I am a critic who has genuinely strong opinions on this film, at the same time, I am also a member of the YouTube film community. So voicing those strong opinions comes with it a weight of responsibility to make sure more than ever that what I am saying is not mean-spirited or unfair or cutting down other members of this community for being successful. And on top of all of that, I am also an aspiring filmmaker. These guys are literally meeting my heroes right now, while I'm just sitting here making this stupid video. While I think it'd be unfair to say my criticisms are entirely born of envy, it'd be dishonest of me to say I'm not jealous of them to some degree. I know this is a very long-winded and odd way to begin a review of a film, but I just want to be as clear as possible about where I am coming from when I say that Talk to Me is an inarguably good film, even a great one at times. But it is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it is one of the most reinvigorating and energetic horror films I've seen in the last 5 years, and on the other, it is one more nail in the coffin for a subgenre of horror that hasn't had a single new idea in 50 years. I am going to attempt to reconcile these two contradictory trains of thought by smashing them together head on. But before I do that, I will warn you that I will be spoiling the shit out of Talk to Me. So if you haven't seen it already, you absolutely should. It's one of the best pieces of horror media this year. Do not miss out on it for the sake of this video, please. And I'll also warn you that from here on out, there will be light discussions of trauma, drug use, violence, and gore. So if that's not your thing, please click away now. And with all that out of the way, here's my train wreck of a video that you hopefully won't look away from. As I mentioned earlier, it would be very difficult for me to argue that Talk to Me is not a good film because it is a good film, plain and simple. There's a ton of things to appreciate here, especially considering this is a directorial debut. I think the word I'd use to best describe this film, above all else, is visceral. From the opening moments, this film comes out swinging with an extremely impressive 2-minute one-take shot that perfectly sets up just about everything you're going to see. It's flashy, it's energetic, and by the time it ends, it is downright gruesome. It's flawless, honestly. And as the film progresses, it continues to show its hand in very satisfying ways, clearly laying out the stakes and themes of its story. We see our main character Mia grieving during the anniversary of her mother's death, as well as her constantly reaching out for a connection with those close to her, minus her father, who she seems to be deliberately cutting herself off from. It works on a thematic level, something I'll talk more about later, but also establishing her cold and dejected nature logically explains why she would be so enticed by this mysterious, yet thrilling demonic hand she keeps seeing in online videos. Speaking of which, for a long time, the horror genre has struggled in the age of cell phones and social media, as both those things tend to push horror tropes to their logical breaking point. Too often, their existence causes the audience to ask themselves things like, well, why don't they just pull out their phone and call for help? Why don't they just record what's happening with their phone so they can prove it later? So for a long time, if horror wanted to rehash old tropes, it had to constantly find excuses to get the cell phones out of the equation, or attempt to integrate cell phones and social media into the horror, which often yielded gimmicky and flatly embarrassing results.
Dude, this is dark web.
Talk to Me, by comparison, leans into social media and cell phones in a very organic way, highlighting the struggle to find meaningful, tangible connections with people around you in a world where everyone is staring at a screen all day, as well as how social media often encourages and glorifies reckless, self-destructive behavior for clout. It would be really easy to display these things in a way that feels forced and cringeworthy, but I think Talk to Me really makes it work, and that's a sentiment I also share for the demonic hand, which, despite how dangerous it is, ultimately makes the characters feel incredible, which serves as a clever and direct allegory for drug culture and the peer pressure that comes with it, especially among teenagers. It works so well as depicted, not because it's saying anything profound about those things, but because not only is treating possession like a drug a refreshing and entertaining spin on an age-old concept, but because the film actually takes the time to highlight why someone would be compelled to engage with those things. Maybe they're grieving, maybe they don't have any meaningful connections with the people around them, so this danger provides a meaningful escape for them, one that allows them to actually feel like they're part of a social group, one that actually makes them feel alive again. It's not incredibly subtle, but it is thoughtful and speaks especially to young people without talking down to them, all while making the motivations of our protagonist and the themes of the story clear and allowing for reasonable suspension of disbelief, which is aided tremendously by the performances, none of which are by A-list celebrities, yet all of which are at the very least believable and more often than not, emotionally engaging, carried by a standout performance from Sophie Wilde as Mia. She nails the range and nuance of this character and really elevates the thematic material. One thing I really like about Mia's portrayal in this film, both in writing and performance, is how they continually show her lack of boundaries. She's never outright malicious to anyone, but she does tiptoe close to crossing a few lines here and there, being maybe a little too close with her best friend's younger brother Riley, definitely being too close to her best friend's boyfriend Daniel, and generally oversharing and not drawing a line with the people close to her, which is so genius because it clearly establishes her greatest flaw when it comes to how she interacts with the spirits. She opens the door for them, but doesn't close it. The spirits use her lack of boundaries to their advantage, allowing them to see more and more of her and weaponize her vulnerability against her, like her grief and denial with her mom's passing or her attachment to Riley, which creates such a searing and sinister threat and makes it all the more clear why she was a perfect target for these spirits. And this searing and sinister threat is only reinforced by the frenetic camera work that feels in the spirit of Sam Raimi, or maybe James Wan, but also feels like a perfect distillation of the modern youthful spirit and demonic intensity the film is portraying. It allows for the horrific violence, displayed beautifully through excellent practical gore effects, to hit with full force impact, to actually shock and disturb, which is no small feat. While I love the more methodical and cerebral dread of a lot of other A24 projects, I think there's always a place for horror that doesn't pull its punches, and Talk to Me is a perfect example of why. Everything I've talked about so far culminated to instill in me a profound sense of anxiety and discomfort. By the halfway point, I could feel the crescendo of fear rumbling under my seat. I was ready for heads to roll once the climax finally hit, and then the film just rehashed a bunch of ideas I've seen plenty of times before. Now, calling something unoriginal is a very easy criticism to brush off, and that's for good reason. Originality in art is a complex topic, one that my thoughts are always evolving on, but it's pretty indisputable that all art is derivative of the art that came before it. That's just how art works, no way around it. So much like I attempted to in the beginning of this video, I want to make it as clear as possible up front where I'm coming from when I say Talk to Me is unoriginal. Now, obviously, given how much I praised the themes of the story and the filmmaking on display, this is not a thematic or technical issue. While it'd be hard for me to say that the camera work and themes on display are anything new, I do think they speak to now. They're relevant and exciting. They feel fresh. My issue with the film's proposed unoriginality is also not conceptual. I mean, I do think that possession horror is an overplayed genre, but there's nothing wrong with taking a tried and true concept and putting a different spin on it, like turning demonic possession into a party drug, which is novel and subversive. But what the film does with that novel concept, that is where my issue stems from. It's entirely mechanical, not the who, what, when, where, or why, the how. I'm not mad that the film doesn't reinvent the wheel. I'm upset that it doesn't turn it in a new direction. This problem starts first with the demonic spirits in the film, not simply their existence. No, again, it's about what those demons do, and what they do is all the same shit they did in The Exorcist, which just celebrated its 50th anniversary. And the thing is, it's not like The Exorcist is this untouchable beacon of originality either. Its depictions of demons are heavily reliant on the tropes found within the lore of Christianity. However, the film is still iconic and thus easily recognizable. It is so ubiquitous that if you've watched any possession horror film in the last 50 years, you have basically seen The Exorcist, and Talk to Me is no exception. The demons look just like Reagan from The Exorcist, they speak in different languages.
Don't you agree? Bonjour.
They prey on the souls of the innocent, they make people and objects move with their supernatural power, they torment you with visions of your dead loved ones. They do all the standard boilerplate stuff you'd expect a demon to do, and that's about it.
Clutches of the noonday devil.
Oh shit, not you there.
Which, at face value, did rob the story of a bit of its scare factor for me because I've seen this exact depiction of demons way too many times.
You've seen this before? 11 times, as a matter of fact. Yes, hello, doctor, hospital. Won't do any good. 11 times. Oh, he's a goner.
But to make matters worse, demons only being able to do stereotypical things also made it far too obvious how many sequences in the film would play out. The biggest example being the incredibly pivotal scene where Mia kills her father. Thematically, this scene totally works. We've seen her time and time again trying to cut her father out of her life, while at the same time we know how much she's been craving meaningful connections. So when she finally repairs her broken relationship with her father, only to be deceived by a demonic spirit who convinces her to kill him, literally cutting him out of her life for good, it's downright tragic. Or at least it would be if it didn't play out in the most cliche way imaginable. It's everything that happens between this moment and this moment that bothers me, because as soon as this moment happened, I could picture the rest of the scene in my head. The spirit is lying because that's obviously not her mom. It's a movie demon doing movie demon things, and her dad's gonna come in looking like a demon, but she'll be in a trance and stab him, and it'll turn out it was actually her real dad who wasn't a demon, and what do you know, that's exactly what happened, beat by beat. I didn't think this just because they'd established it earlier, which I'll get to that in a second. I thought this more so in the moment because of how many times I've seen this exact scene in a horror film, which I'm not saying to flex how much more knowledgeable of a horror fan I am. I'm saying that to express my disappointment in how unsurprising this sequence was. Which, for the record, I could also make the exact same argument for many other sequences in this film.
violent.
But the point is that it was hard to be as shocked and disturbed as the film intended me to be when everything felt so telegraphed. It's the Bart and Lisa Simpson screamatorium problem.
I want your blood!
That was just confusing. Behold, the ravages of age.
Sorry.
I know that in the grand scheme of everything this film does right, this seems like such a minor complaint, especially considering how much time I spent praising the film for its ability to clearly set up its threats using themes and camera work. But all that setup ultimately only served to make every foreseen payoff feel like a punch to the gut of disappointment. I just couldn't help but feel like the film showed its full hand too early, that it exhausted every new and exciting idea it had by the 45-minute mark. Because that disappointment I felt extended through much of the second half of the film, all the way down to the twist reveal ending. After Mia is ultimately sacrificed to save Riley in a scene eerily reminiscent of the ending of The Exorcist, Mia finds herself in the spirit world, which thematically is absolutely brilliant. The film spends its time building up a character who wants nothing more than to physically and emotionally connect with other people, in order to reveal that, in the end, her wish has been fulfilled in true monkey's paw fashion. In a dark and twisted way, she'll never be alone again. But in terms of actual mechanics, it fell a bit flat for me because I saw it coming from a mile away. The film's second half never threw me any curveballs, so I had no reason to doubt that this is how it would end. Aristotle said that the best endings are surprising, but inevitable. And for me, this ending was definitely inevitable, but also unfortunately predictable. And if there's one thing I personally feel horror should never be, it's predictable. If it's too telegraphed, if it's too formulaic, if the threats feel too familiar, it's just not frightening to me. So at the end of it all, I feel completely torn on the film. As I've said, it is a youth-driven, modernized, daring, and visceral horror film with a reinvigorating, frenetic energy that the possession horror subgenre has desperately needed for a long time, but I think it betrays itself by being too dragged down by old, tired ideas. I'd chalk this up to being a financial decision, as unfortunately a more recognizable film will likely be a more financially successful one, but Michael and Danny Philippou have made it very clear that this was their uncompromised vision. They turned away millions of dollars in studio money to make this what it is. And I have no doubt in my mind that the studio notes they were originally getting would have made this film damn near unwatchable, and I respect them so much for sticking to their guns and making the film they wanted to make. And I wouldn't ask them to change it on my behalf. I just wish the film they wanted to make was as daring and subversive as it seemingly promised to be through its timely themes, novel concept, and dynamic camera work. But I feel the most important thing to remember about all of this, and I mean this so sincerely, is that my opinion on this film does not matter at all.
The bitter truth we critics must face is that the average piece of junk is probably more meaningful than our criticism designating it so.
Pop culture, especially when it comes to horror, belongs to the youth. Young people love this movie to death. Hell, even every other critic in the world loves this movie to death, and I don't blame them a bit, because I'll say it again, Talk to Me is an inarguably good film. Michael and Danny Philippou have undeniable talent, limitless potential, and hopefully a long career ahead of them with all the industry support they rightfully deserve. I have no doubt in my mind that these guys have a masterpiece in them, and I can't wait to see it. Talk to Me just wasn't fully what I hoped it would be, personally. Nothing more, nothing less. Thank you to anyone who supports me by liking, subscribing, or donating to my Patreon, like these lovely people on screen. That is, if I have any supporters left after this video goes live. Yeah, that's it for me. I'm gonna go log off for like a month. Bye.